We're really pleased to have our four guests representing different dimensions of the greater Cambridge venture ecology and venture financing ecology joining us tonight. But before we kick into introductions of each of them and have a conversation around sources of funding and the challenges, possibilities there, I just want to point out what's not at the table. That probably the dominant source of funding for most companies planet-wide is either savings or customers, or it's friends and family. And in some sense, they're only partly represented here, and yet incredibly important. One of the questions earlier to Steve was, what do you do in a place where you don't have a well-functioning public offering market, or you don't have a long tradition of venture capital financing? Well, it turns out there's a good reason why we've got family venture groups, family businesses in many emerging markets. Right? It's partially because of the issues surrounding trust and the gathering together of capital to push into new directions to finance new ventures. But it's incredibly important to also put that in your larger consideration set, that there are, in fact, ways of accumulating a critical mass of money in order for you to push into a new direction to get a new venture started. We will only touch on those indirectly tonight, but we'll push especially on the new ways of appealing to and rallying customer financing tonight. The whole world of crowdfunding is represented by Max Lobovsky, who is a co-founder of FormLabs, who raised not only angel financing, but went to the mechanism of Kickstarter to raise funding for his 3D printing venture. We're pleased to have Karl Ruping join us as co-founder and managing director of Tank, which is this angel and seed financing entity. And Karl has had the I think, good fortune of working with upwards of a half dozen or more nascent technologists out of MIT and other labs from the Boston metro area, and help them grow and build their businesses over time. Give us a taste for what the world of angel and seed financing is like. We're pleased to have joining us Rae, who is managing director of Boston's incarnation of TechStars, one of perhaps the most well-orchestrated of the accelerators that have blossomed over the last few years. Born, by the way, in Boulder, Colorado, from the activities of our guest speaker last year, Brad Feld, who's himself an alumnus, an entrepreneur, a venture capitalist, an investor in multiple MIT-related companies. The network of venture investment really does span the continent, for that matter, increasingly the world, and I hope Katie can share with us not only TechStars activity here, but TechStars as a network and accelerators as a blossoming source of venture support. And last but not least, Dan Reiss, alumnus, engineer by background, but now with Matrix Partners, which is a top-tier venture capital fund with investments and successful and unsuccessful. Stan, maybe you can share with us some of those stories. The ventures in some of the most interesting technology-based companies born increasingly worldwide, but certainly here in the Boston metro area, Silicon Valley and beyond. So with that sort of general preamble, what I'd like to do is ask each of our panelists to give sort of the summary, essential, a little bit more depth background about themselves, and then we can launch into a conversation about venture financing. Max.
So my name is Max Lobovsky, and I'm a co-founder of FormLabs, which is a tech startup developing a desktop 3D printer. And before that, I was a master's student at the MIT Media Lab. And I guess, so FormLabs, we raised a seed round of funding from a number of angel investors and small venture capital companies. And then when we were going to bring our product to market in September of last year, we put it on Kickstarter to raise funding for production. And we raised about $3 million on Kickstarter. And now we are getting ready to ship our product and continue to take pre-orders on our website. And that's where we've gotten to.
So we'll hear a bit more about what that was like, both the raising of angel money, early financing, but then the use of this mechanism, crowdfunding, or at least rallying of customers together through this mechanism. It's fantastic. There's no equity given up in that process, right? This is purely customer funding, where you get the money up front and you ship product later.
Yep.
Fantastic stuff. Karl, give us a taste of what you're up to.
Sure. So Ink Tank is an early stage venture capital fund. It's really in the form of a family office, meaning my partners and myself, we're the ones who actually supply the funding into our fund.
Yeah, this is live.
That's alive.
It is live, but you gotta have the phone.
Got it. So Ink Tank is an early stage venture capital fund. We focused on university-sourced technology startups. We like the zero stage, very right from the start. Our fund is arranged as a family office, which means that our partners ourselves are our own investors. So we're investing partner funds into our startups. And what we like to do is, because we're early stage and it's our own funding, we like to co-invest, or we like to find alternative sources of funding. That may include something like a Kickstarter. As a matter of fact, one of our most recent investments, Misfit Wearables, was on Indiegogo and did quite well. Or we look for SBIR grants to come in along with our investments, and we really grow along with our startups right from zero stage into Series B, and into Series C we're probably stepping back to somebody with a little bit more appetite.
So I run, as was said before, an accelerator here called TechStars, but that phenomenon has kind of grown really around the world at this point. And it's a replacement really of two things: friends and family money. So it's accelerators give somewhere between 10 and 100 and some odd $1,000. And it organizes kind of the friends and family stage that allows a lot more people to get a business off the ground quickly, but it also does it in a way that in general engages the startup community around them, so that you bring expertise and create a community around a group of startups. And I think that aspect of it, kind of helping the community to organize around startups and forming a strong bond, has just kind of worked over time. And it's still early to understand how returns work on accelerators. And I think just like big venture capital funds, there'll be some that do great and some that won't. But I think the organizing principle has taken off. I'll tell you, because I'm here in Boston and we're a crossroads for entrepreneurs, people from every continent have been through to say, hey, how does this thing really work? And, tell me the secret to it. And TechStars has organized something called the Global Accelerator Network, which has many, many members from every continent. And I think it's this growing movement where we kind of all learn from each other best practice, how to help entrepreneurs, how to, organize and rally investors as well. And, we're lucky in the US, and especially in big cities, that we've kind of organized a lot of angel capital at this point and a lot of venture capital. That definitely is not true in most places around the world. And some of it is actually structural. So in many places in South America, if you invest into a startup and that startup gets sued, they can go after your personal assets, which would make you very, very reticent to be an angel investor there, which is why the family groups have formed to basically be the capital source, because you're not going to sue your uncle as quickly as you'd sue some rich dude, right? So I think that's kind of why the accelerator network has grown.
So my name's Stan Reiss, and I represent the establishment here. We are, that's right. So we are at, we're probably the oldest institution in the room. We're a 35-year-old early stage venture capital firm. We invest early. We invest when the company is getting formed, but because we're a relatively large fund, we only invest in things that have potential to get pretty big. We can't invest in things that shoot for a $10 million exit, even though that's a very viable thing for some companies to go do. Our current fund is $450 million. That's our 10th fund. We've had the good fortune to be in business with some very, very good companies, of which I'm not going to list, but I see a bunch of you are using computers of a company we invested in. But there's a lot of others. And what's been really interesting to us has been the rise of some of these new sources of funding that have come up that a couple of you guys represent, that have changed the way a lot of things get off the ground, and they've broadened the ecosystem, which is great.
So just to put this in context, let's give you a sense of the relative ages of these sectors of financing. The oldest organized mode of rallying money is probably family capital groups, individual angels, wealthy individuals who end up funding early companies. So businesses like many of the early airlines were funded by wealthy individuals back in the 1930s and earlier. The first formally organized venture capital group was actually born here in Boston Metro. The MIT president at the time, Compton, rallied at Harvard Business School professor Dorio, together with a half dozen other academics and leaders of finance in the mid-1940s, post-World War II, the very first formally organized venture fund. Right? So think about that. We're talking about nearly 3/4 of a century, 60, 70 years is when venture capital as a sector blossomed. The emergence of accelerators is really early case examples dating back 15 years plus, but really it's blossomed over the course of the last 5 or few years. And then Kickstarter, the Kickstarter, Indiegogo, the many sources of crowdfunding, or at least in this particular case, customers rallying together. That's been a phenomenon for quite a while, but the modern internet-enabled world of crowdfunding is really only a few years old. And that, too, is a territory ripe, very frothy. Another one of our alums, Mike Norman, is one of the key people behind crowdfunding of equity financing, as opposed to the crowdfunding of customers. So this is a territory that's fast-changing right now. Now, all of these sources of money resonate and build upon and feed off of, in a positive way, one another. So what I'd like to perhaps ask each of you next is to give us a little taste for why you took, in your case, Max, the path that you took, raising angel money and then using this new source of crowdfunding. Why didn't you do something more classical? Why go through this bold move? Because you could have gone out, tried to raise the money on Kickstarter and failed.
So why did we raise?
Why did you try that way? Why did you follow the path you followed?
So I think what we did is we knew from the beginning that we needed some amount of money to develop our product to the point where it could be viable in the market, and we needed even more to actually, significantly more, to bring it, really bring it to the market and finish production. And so I guess we kind of split that in half. And so we had an angel round that we kind of used just to finance the development of the product. And then the plan from the beginning was to use pre-orders of our product to finance production. And so we, originally we were just thinking, okay, we're going to take pre-orders through some mechanism. Some of our competitors had also, taken orders for their product, fully paid orders many months in advance. And then, as we got closer to that point, we were looking at options of doing that. And Kickstarter was a really amazing way to do that because it has a already sort of built-in community and built-in PR and marketing around that. And really, I think the biggest thing it does is it lends a little bit of credibility. It's pretty hard, especially for a product like ours that's priced at around $3,000, to come out and say, never shipped anything, here's this product, it looks pretty cool, but it doesn't exist yet, put $3,000 down. And so having Kickstarter next to your name really gives you
A kick, yeah.
Yeah, it gives you some credibility.
So two questions. One around the angel money. How many sources of angel funding do you have to talk to, and how many did you end up raising money from, and what kind of numbers are involved there?
So so thinking about the history of FormLabs, it's basically I've been working on it for 2 years, and almost, although I was a student for a good portion of the first year, basically the entire first year was spent raising money, and a lot of that is because I had never done it before, and things got a lot better once I got involved with other co-founders, one of whom had more experience with that, but also just, it takes a long time to sort of hone your message and learn exactly what investors are interested in, and then also find sort of key early believers who can help to rally other investors behind you. So we spent a long time talking to
So guess,
yeah.
dozens, 100?
I probably had like a formal pitch meeting where I went through my 12-slide PowerPoint or whatever. I probably did 100 or more of those. I actually pitched all 3 of these organizations, none of whom are investors.
Aha!
But yeah, among many others.
And when you did close that angel round, what kind of numbers are we talking about? How many people were in that, or organizations were in that round?
We have probably too many investors. So there's a number of smaller investors. There's a few key investors who are really the key to find everybody else, because once they're behind you, so those are Joey Ito, the director of the Media Lab, who's we met through the Media Lab, but he has a venture capital fund of his own, and then Mitch Caper, who is an entrepreneur and has another small sort of seed fund of his own. And once we got those people behind us, we got about 10 or more other smaller investors of various types.
So a dozen or so investors in total, raising on the order of?
Over $1 million. Yeah.
All right, and then that followed by the Kickstarter campaign. And maybe we'll revisit this later, but raising the kind of money you raise is unusual. Your original goal was relatively modest compared to what you ended up raising. Any success tips for people in the audience? What was the 1 or 2 most useful things you did?
We treated it as like a product launch. This isn't just putting a project on Kickstarter. This is introducing your company and your product to the world, and so there's a lot of preparation you need to do. So we prepared a Kickstarter video, and we brought in a professional videographer, we brought in a professional photographer. We spent, I remember we had a kind of all hands meeting about 2 months before Kickstarter and said we're doing this, and we basically shifted half the company onto working on preparing all this material, thinking about there's one of the kind of frustrating things about Kickstarter is even though you're getting this money up front and you haven't fully committed to the product, you do have to start really committing to something that isn't completely done. So you have to carefully go through a lot of decisions about how are we going to ship this, to what countries, what are we promising about its performance that maybe we haven't completely proven out yet. And so there's a lot of places where you have to balance sort of the PR and marketing aspect of what you'll be able to deliver on. But I think one of the most important things is just high production value with everything you do really helps to lend credibility. Just visually, you see a page, a Kickstarter page or your website, and you can usually tell within seconds whether you think this is like a real company or a real product, and that's just making it look good.
Max, haven't they put some restrictions on what companies? I thought they've put restrictions. Oh, this doesn't work. I've thought they've put restrictions on what you have to promise as a company if you're a physical product company now, so that it's maybe not quite as easy as it used to be. But you probably know a lot more about that than I do.
Yeah, so they did recently add some, actually just as we were launching, so we were subject to those restrictions as well. And they seem to be going from 2 different sides at once. On one side, they don't want products that will never ship. And so they said, like, we don't want any renderings of products. We only want real photos and videos. On the other hand, they also say they don't want to be a store. So they don't want stuff that looks too finished. So at this point, honestly, it's unclear to me about what exactly they want. And I think, honestly, it's unclear to them because they need to maintain sort of this community aspect, but they also need to not disappoint their customers. So
It's like an ugly first product that you make look more beautiful. Seems like the sweet spot right now.
yeah,
Well, I don't know. Their first product is quite.
No, I'm not saying his is ugly. I'm saying the photos you can put up and then you, with the money, make it better.
right. No,
Yeah.
honestly, it's kind of that case. I mean, Misfit was rejected probably. I mean, I think or I don't know if they. Yeah.
Well, actually, let's shift on that. I want to revisit your Kickstarter experience, Max, later. But for now, Karl, in your own experience in investing in these several companies that have now raised subsequent rounds of money, in a few cases have had exit, you talked about co-financing mechanisms. Like you're putting a modest amount of money and a lot of sweat equity into these companies. What is the role of SBIRs? What is the role of I mean, Max Spotlight, Kickstarter, you've had Misfit Wearable use Indiegogo. What about the other collateral sources of funding?
Well, I think every business and every business model has its own unique needs, and it probably has its own particular fundraising strategy that works best. And so there's no one right way. And I've seen several different types of companies do several different types of early funding rounds.
But maybe give an example or so. Like
One being Agravita, which came right from chemical engineering. They're doing bioethanol. And right from the early start, I was worried about that company, about funding that myself, because that's a big chunk of change. It's almost like the pharmaceutical industry. Earlier we heard that, you know, an easy way for an angel investor to lose his or her money is to invest in bio. Well, it's similar to ag bio, I would say. And so in that case, we started right off the bat going for SBIRs, Department of Energy, DARPA, and even state grants. And even before we put any of our money in, we were funding the company and we were funding the development of IP through a variety of SBIRs in Massachusetts
just
state
to
governments.
define that for folks. What kind of money are we talking about? What's the scale of funds?
Phase,
Let's use this.
sorry.
Yeah, this one actually works.
Okay,
here.
this is stronger. Sure. So phase one SBIRs are typically $100,000 to $150,000 for a 6-month period of funding. Phase two, and it's sort of changing
And that's
now.
grant funding.
This is grant funding, so it's non-dilutive. And phase two would be 250 or even more. And there are now some phase one, phase twos that clump those two processes together. Then DARPA could be much larger. And I know that some of the grants that Agravita secured relatively early on were on the order of $1.2 million. And so to be able to come in as an early stage investor and have already put in a little bit of skin in the game, $150,000 just to buy some equipment, another $150,000 to get some lab space, and then having a $1.2 million grant hit, it gives you a sense of comfort.
What's the time arc of that, though? It doesn't happen overnight. You need lead time
no.
to get the money. What?
I'd say SBIRs, you should expect not to win on the first one, particularly if you're a first-time entrepreneur. Take your first SBIR as a learning process. As a matter of fact, file your SBIRs even before you're ready, just to get some feedback. In other words, ready before you start your startup. And use that as sort of a learning tool. It's almost like pitching a early stage angel. The granting authorities will give you some feedback, and use that to develop a better second generation SBIR. And then there are some other types of funds. For example, here in Massachusetts, if you're in the energy space, there's a number of small grants that you can apply for here. And then there's a whole bunch of,
In the biospace,
of course, biotech and otherwise. So there's a whole number of non-SBIR grant opportunities as well.
A little word of caution on those things, though, because it's easy to get hooked on grants and then doing something that you didn't originally intend to do. And sometimes the grants are, you want to make oranges, the grants are available for apples. You sit around the table, convince yourself they're both fruit. And the next thing you do, your company's way behind schedule. So you got to be very disciplined. They're great sources of funding, but you've got to be disciplined. Make sure you get the right ones.
Actually, just one comment to that. My favorite SBIR grant to apply for is one that we've already done, virtually done, almost completed. And so it's in the right direction and you already have the data.
Yeah.
So.
But, I mean, I think, at least for startups that I deal with, we have many of them apply for SBIRs, and some of them get them. But mostly you're going to run out of time before you get an SBIR. So that's why your model is interesting. But most entrepreneurs, you cannot count on it at all, right? So you have to get your angels behind you. And it's just a bonus round then for the company is how I see it. But a really, really nice non-dilutive bonus round that everybody's happy about, unless it's oranges. Yeah.
So Katie, with TechStars, you have as an accelerator, you have a number of constraints and benefits. One of the constraints is the sort of periodicity. You've got everybody applying for a certain deadline. You've got people together for a period of time. Give us some sense of the likelihood and the period and the consequences. What kind of money is being invested?
Yep. So in Boston, we run the program twice a year. We have over 1,000 companies apply for about 12 spots. So the likelihood of any one company getting in is very, very low. I will say that because people are in Cambridge, it's easier. When we meet entrepreneurs, your likelihood almost always goes up that you'll get in because you're not just a name on a piece of paper. I think that's true in venture and anywhere else, right? You don't just mail in for money. So this is all about personal relationships, really. But accelerator programs are all over the country, so we're not the only one to apply to. There are others in the area. Tends to be under $25,000 initial investment. TechStars also gives every entrepreneur that gets into the program the ability to take an extra $100,000 if you want it. Almost always entrepreneurs take us up on that $100,000 because it's essentially easy to raise, right? Raising $100,000 sounds simple, but it often isn't. I mean, it often involves many, many lunches, dinners, what feels like begging. And so entrepreneurs are psyched to have an extra $100,000. It's runway for you. We found that a lot of entrepreneurs during our 3 months together were running out of capital. And we thought that was stupid, essentially. We were like, why would we invest in a company that will be dead by the end of 3 months because they'll realize I've maxed out my credit cards, my parents are pissed off, or my spouse, girlfriend, whoever, boyfriend, whoever it is angry that I've given up a job. And so we put a pool of capital together to make that constraint lifted so they had time to think bigger about what they wanted to do and a little more time to raise money.
So one other aspect about accelerators is very exciting is the power of co-location. You've got people together, and not only that, you've got this fantastic group of mentors and advisors and people who are part of the larger ecosystem of TechStars. Speak about that, the power of community and co-location.
So we think it's really important that our entrepreneurs are co-located together. So we rent a space that all 12 to 14 teams can come be together for those really 6 months. I mean, it's 3 months when our mentors are there, but it's really 6 months of time. And there are two core reasons. One, you want to make it really, really easy for the amazing mentors, the former CEOs, angel investors, to actually find you. And so if we open our doors and make it welcoming, it's much easier to get them to meet with our entrepreneurs. So that's just a practical reason. And there are other accelerators that don't take that approach, but we think it's a really important approach. The other thing is for the entrepreneurs themselves. Our entrepreneurs become incredibly good friends. When you go through something as intense as an accelerator program, you get to know each other in very, very intimate ways. You know what people suck at, you know what they're good at, you know what everyone's secret weapon is, and they all help each other because they're all different, right? Some of our entrepreneurs are incredible salespeople, and some are incredible technologists, and some are a little of both. Some are great marketers, designers, and when you start to know people, they all want to help each other. So we think everyone gets further faster. And also, it's just, there's such a bond. They all come back, they all know each other's families. And, you know, entrepreneurship's a pretty lonely gig for a lot of people. And so we just try to bring that loneliness factor down. And we find that our entrepreneurs tend to be happier and get a lot more help. So I think that's like a double bonus.
Got it.
So.
Stan, you and your partners have to put hundreds of millions of dollars to work. What does that mean? How many companies can you divide that money between, and for how many rounds are you involved, and how picky does that make you?
Yeah. Well, so, we end up investing on average about a company per partner per year, roughly, is the way to think about it. Maybe with a little bit more if we do some seeds. We do some seeds sometimes, and although our business is A rounds, it's companies that get bigger.
Just describe what that is.
A seed versus an A round?
Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of companies will go out there and raise a small amount of money, something measured in the hundreds of thousands typically, to go prove a certain thing out, this has become much easier. It's become much easier to prove something out on a few $100,000 over the last few years because of the availability of open source software, of the fact that on the internet you can get distribution cheaply, easily, so you can go and get a very significant milestone done, and attract more capital, B, maybe increase your valuation, C, attract better people, do all sorts of things to make it a stronger deal. And this is a relatively new phenomenon. We've always done seeds, but a decade ago, a seed would be something that you would do every now and then because there was a specific milestone, maybe a technical milestone that needed to be proved, but it was pretty clear that you weren't going to get anywhere until you had millions of dollars because you had to build a product and hire salespeople. Eventually, companies get through this milestone, and most companies need a fair bit of money in order to become a big public company. Our goal is to invest in things, to really only invest things that have a chance of becoming public, and very few companies become public for raising less than, I don't know, $30, $40 million. It'd be great if they did, but they don't. The way companies tend to raise money is they raise money in stages. Maybe the first round, beyond the seed round, maybe the first round is $5 to $10 million. The second one is maybe 20 to 30, and it depends on how the company grows. We get involved at the beginning. There's a whole bunch of other venture funds that like to get involved later, that maybe will lead a B round, will lead a C round. And the idea is that the valuation keeps going up, and therefore the amount of ownership that entrepreneurs have to give up to raise this money on a proportional basis decreases as they get farther along, and more and more people get, the pool of capital gets bigger. The later stage people tend to write very large checks. We get involved. Funds like ours write a check in every single round. So we write a small check in a seed round, a bigger check in an A round, and we continue to write checks farther along to support the company. It's very difficult for a company to raise money if the investors that are already there aren't writing a check, because the new investors, will look around and say, this guy knows a little bit more than I do. He's not writing a check. Why in the world would I write a check? So we have to do that. Although the checks that we write tend to get smaller along the way, just because that's our business is early stage. It's different for other guys.
So collectively then, a company that's on a successful path and on a pathway towards a public offering or maybe an acquisition, you and your partners will have put how much money to work in a sort of typical company?
Yeah, so I think we think of a company as a $10 to $15 million event typically, and we've exceeded that in a number of cases, and we're very excited. Or if for some reason the company needed more money, but typically 10 to 15 million bucks. So if you think of a $450 million fund, you'll end up with you end up somewhere at 40 companies because some of them never make it to the B round or the C round or the D round, and sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for less good reasons.
So I want to maybe revisit the question of failure modes in a bit, but for now, let's talk about the success side. Are you investing as a company alone at each of these stages, or do you and your peers tend to like banding together with others to be co-investors in a company?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? And there are some styles. In an A round, you'll find some firms like to invest alone. Most firms like to invest with a partner. We tend to look at it depending on how capital intensive the company is. If it's something that's likely to be capital intensive, then we wouldn't invest without a partner, because now, now that you have a partner, you have someone else around the table that's got deep pockets, you can go farther. And that's something, if you have a capital intensive company, you need to be thinking about that. You need to build capital base around the company right from the beginning. Because if you ever encounter a tough spot, the people around you are pregnant. The people that are not there aren't. And it can be very hard to attract people. We like to have new people come in and follow-on rounds. Have someone come in and price them around. It's very awkward for us to set a price on with an entrepreneur where we're already investors and they don't go talk to anybody else, and it's a sort of an unpleasant type of push me pull you negotiation that we hate. That entrepreneurs don't like it. So generally, and I think that's true of most firms, generally we would ask a company to go find an external investor for a B round, for a C round, et cetera, to go price it and lead it. It doesn't always happen, right? So that happens when things are going well. When things aren't going well, we have to do it ourselves. We have to find some way of setting that round, and hopefully we feel confident enough to write a check. I've been in this business for 12 years, through 2 pretty nasty startup recessions, and I've written more inside round checks than I care to admit to, just simply because there were times where nobody was interested in certain types of things. And then the other thing to think about, my whole industry is a bunch of lemmings. We are very focused on kind of what's hot at any given time. Last week it was clean tech. This week it is not. Yesterday it was consumer internet. Now it's enterprise. So things change a lot. And on one hand, it's nice it's kind of appealing to make fun of that. And I came out of MIT and I was a very intellectual guy, and I like to be smarter than everybody else. And I always thought that I'll be just contrarian. All these idiots will do one thing. And it turns out you can't be contrarian for too long, because you need somebody else to fund these things. And if all of the lemmings are over jumping off a cliff over there, and you think you're going to be very smart and you're going to go up that mountain, but there's no capital, no food for you up on that mountain. So it's important to some extent to either be in an area that's hot, hopefully ahead of everybody else, or get very, very good traction very, very quickly, so you can make progress and raise money from outside sources despite lack of heat in an area.
So also, give us a sense for you and your peer investors investing in a company at each of these stages of investment. What kind of stake in the company are you typically taking or exchanging? What each round?
So very, very broad answer. We strive to own 20%, 20+% of every company we invest in. Some cases it's 20, some cases it's 30, some cases it's even higher.
When all is said and done, after all investments.
Yeah, and most of our ownership is bought at A round. So typically after the A round, we'll own 20 to 25% of a company. There's a big variety there, because sometimes sometimes an A round means a company's been seeded, they've proven a lot, and the price is higher than I'd like it to be, but I'm still excited about the company, and then we own less. And some cases, if you want to raise money for a semiconductor company right now, which is very much out of favor, the prices are lower, and we pay market prices, and we end up owning more after an A round. The future rounds is completely determined by the market. Right? So if you are performing well and you're in a hot space, you could have a very non-dilutive B and C round. And you can imagine raising $20 million for a B round and giving up only 20% of your company total. If you're in a hot space. If you're not, then you can imagine a 1.5x or even a flat B round for your company. So there's a huge range. It's sort of out of our hands at that point, except in that supposedly, hopefully, we're helping the entrepreneur build a company, as is everybody else around this table, so that they can maximize their chances of taking the least dilution they possibly can.
So Katie, at an accelerator, in exchange for the 25K plus the additional 100K, what are the companies exchanging for that investment?
For us at TechStars Boston, it's 6% common. We take common shares, so we're essentially becoming your next co-founder. That's how we explain it, and we have
That's
the
for the
same.
25.
That's for the 18K. That's what we are. And then if you want to take the 100K, it's a capped note with very founder-friendly terms in it, which it will depend on what your round, basically your next equity round goes at.
So to clarify this point, this is important.
This just convertible debt.
The valuation of your company is not set at the time that you get this money, but set at the time of subsequent investment. And more about that on
At the round,
website.
the equity round of investment. So you might raise a convertible note after TechStars, and your price isn't even set then, your per share price. So, yeah. So it's often much later that it's set.
And just to give a taste, TechStars is a few years old at this point. What have your alumni companies gone on to do? I mean, how many of them have engaged with Stan and his peers as venture investors?
So for us, for my investments, which are in Boston, it's about 90+% get follow-on funding. And there are some that choose to bootstrap. I don't have any companies in the dead pool, and I'm at 50 investments. So very, very strong long-term outcomes over time. And I think that is due to community engagement. Like, people support each other. People, they all start thinking like, oh, we're all competing with each other for investors. But really what ends up happening is the first company will get funded, the next, and then all of a sudden everyone's rallying to get the last ones funded, unless somebody's a complete jerk, and that doesn't happen very often. You know, you get shunned by the entrepreneurial community pretty quickly and learn your lessons. So they actually rally and help each other. And valuations kind of post-TechStars, these are all market dependent. So if you went to California, they'd be higher than in Boston. And that would just be like, the caps in California are somewhere between 2 and endless, right? Uncapped. And in Boston, we tend to stay in a much more stable range. We tend to stay somewhere between 2 and 5, 6, 7, 8 once in a while. But we tend to stay in a much narrower range. And that is, as an entrepreneur, most people are thinking about that next round of capital and what's my valuation at that next round? How much am I giving up? But you have to play it out 2 or 3 or 4 more rounds. So if you take your first money after an accelerator and your valuation is 8, 9, 10 million bucks, your next round has to be a huge jump. So you got to get to 15, 20 million. And that hurdle is very, very hard to do. So we tend on the East Coast to tell people, like, take natural jumps. Then you have many fewer down rounds or flat rounds. And down rounds and flat rounds hurt an entrepreneur more than anyone. Like, they are brutal to your innards because you basically get crammed down. And so you might go from owning 50% of a company to owning 20, 10, whatever. It could get worse, right? And so you just don't want, it's really good to just keep going up in valuation if you play the math out. You know, there are always extreme cases on one end or the other, but mainly that works really well for entrepreneurs and investors. So
on the points that Katie just made, we're going to revisit those with our live case study on Thursday, where Yonel Cherry will reveal what
he does?
He will reveal a hell of a lot, because
Wow.
he shows at every single financing event for the company what happened to how much money was raised, what happened to the relative stakes of all the parties, all the previous investors, including the founders. And he reveals all that in a kind of detail that shows both how glorious it can be when things are going well, and then how things can not go well. So we'll see that this Thursday. It's very important. We have this panel here. He gives some sense of this in the abstract, but you're going to see a live case.
Can I just say one more thing that I think is really important, which is angels and venture capitalists and family, you know, three really, and crowdfunding, but let's just deal with angel and venture. They are thinking really, really different things in your first round of funding. Angels tend to be incredibly price sensitive and sensitive about what their rights will be in the future. Some venture capital firms are price sensitive in the first round, so some like to keep the valuations really low. Others are not price sensitive at all because they think, this is a long-term game. We're going to be funding you for a long time. I'll get to my 20-25% in the next round if I have to. So I think people have very different business models and kind of emotional needs as well. And I think it's something to think about because a lot of entrepreneurs get focused on what valuation can I get? And they're thinking the higher the better. And yes, the math plays out that way, but there's so many more factors that you have to consider about who your partner is. Will your partner be there long term? Is this somebody that can actually help me? Is this an option they're taking out on me, or are they taking a long-term bet? Like the Matrix guys, you guys take long-term bets. Like you back the entrepreneur. When you make a bet, like you're staking your name on it. Some venture firms, especially in the seed round, will just roll the dice. It'll be like, we're just taking an option out on 40, 50, 60 seed deals, and then it won't put any time into it. So you have to be really aware when you're taking capital, what bucket are you getting put into? So you might, as an entrepreneur, get in someone's seed option program. They don't care what the cap is on the note, but it also should tell you they're not going to spend any time with you either because they can't, because they're nurturing their big deals that they're putting $10, $20 million into. So you have to, I know I'm probably, for many of you, speaking gibberish, but at some point in the future when you're funding, you'll be like, oh yeah, a cap might matter. And it might matter if this is a long-term bet or not. So just build a little scaffolding there to come back to.
Now, Karl, you've played a role as not only early investor in young technology companies, but you're very hands-on. And just give a sense of where are the pitfalls being so early as an investor. You've got so much time in front of you before these subsequent rounds of investment, before a company can realistically convert. What are some of the challenges from your point of view as an angel? In other words, give people a sense of what should they be aware of the interests and challenges of their early investors.
Well, of course, there's the greatest risk at that stage, and there's the unknown risks that you as the entrepreneur and us as the investors or co-entrepreneurs face. Market risk, technology risk, but I think the greatest risk is team risk. Earlier, there was a question, when do you know you have the right team? And boy, I would like to know that answer. Because at the early stage, that's almost all you can assess. By profession, I'm a patent attorney. That's actually how I got into this profession. And so I was reviewing patents for my venture investor colleagues, and they would ask me, so is that a good patent? And I'd be like, yeah, it's a good patent, well written. I have no idea if it has any market importance or value, but it's the team, because you could be in a particular market and then Microsoft walks in and you're like, oh my God, market changes, but it's the team that reacts. Or the technology fails and it's the team that reacts. Or one of the team members has to quit. Well, somebody else comes up to bat. So it's the team. That's the greatest factor, I think, at the early stage of investing. And then it's everything else. You research the market, you take a look at the competition, and you take a look at the financials. You make sure that there's enough funding to get to the milestones that you need, and then you put 20, 50% on top of that just in case. And you just make sure that you can start hitting your milestones so that you can raise the next round of funding. As a footnote, we also like to start out with convertible notes. It's a fairly good start with the entrepreneurs when you're both trying to build the team together. What we do like to do, though, is to have a max on the conversion valuation. If the company does extremely well, everyone will be very happy to hit that max number. So it gives us a little bit of insurance. But it's sort of the best way, I think, to get to the Series A as a team.
Have these guys all read venture deals or any of this other?
So Katie points out there's a number of key reference materials, all of which are on the nutsandbolts.mit.edu website around tonight's session. I have an extensive list of references, things that you ought to be familiar with. But Karl brings up a key point, what I want to conclude my sort of prepared questions on, which is on the role of the experience and the individuals involved in the venture and the challenges of team over time. I think it's fair to say that most of us in the room, it will be our first startup when we do end up getting something going, or we'll have been a party to a company but haven't experienced the things that founders end up wrestling with in dealing with one another, in dealing with investors. So we're almost all pretty inexperienced as entrepreneurs. And so team issues, you haven't gone through before, you haven't wrestled with it yet. So I'd like to ask each of you to spend a little bit more time on, what are the lessons you've learned about how to pick teammates, how to resolve conflicts between them.
Who do you want to start?
I think something a lot of investors will tell you in the early stage is they're investing in the team, and it starts to sound like a refrain that doesn't mean much, but honestly, I don't know what it means from their side, but from my side, it's definitely the most important thing. The first few people you bring together to do this thing, that is the company. Whatever you thought, the product was or your idea was, like that's important, but it's going to be built by those people, and so I think it's incredibly critical. And I was sitting here while we were talking about this, trying to think about like what kind of advice I can offer to how do you know somebody is a good co-founder? And honestly, it's I don't I don't have any great advice. I just say that you got to be able to live with the person, work very closely with them, and you got to be able to trust them.
So I suppose that means seeing how they operate under stressful conditions.
Yeah, so I think it would be, I had worked with my other co-founders in past projects and things like that, and so that, I don't know how I would have been able to work, to go and do this with them without having that experience with them, and so that's definitely a really tough situation for a lot of people who don't have somebody sort of in their immediate circle to pick from. But there's, you want somebody who, can handle a lot of different situations. Obviously, everybody brings different skills to the team, but in the end, in the beginning, you're all going to be working on all the major decisions together, and so you all need to have some sort of grasp of the technical and business and sort of leadership and all those aspects. It's important. Don't screw it up.
Fair enough. What are some of the pitfalls of teams splitting up?
Oh, well, let me answer that after I just say one thing, which I was thinking is, if you need quick money, don't come to me. I'm a slow investor. I like to work with my entrepreneurs, similar to what you do, for a period of time, get to know them. I like to think that when I go out to lunch with one of my potential entrepreneurs, before he looks at the menu, I know what he's going to order. That's how I like to know the people who I work with and who I invest in. Some of the pitfalls, again, around team is not knowing the entire team as they're forming, not being in the process of hiring new people. I like to be very involved in that, particularly when it's a new CEO. Very critical hires, but even junior hires. So again, at the early stage, I would say HR is a fundamental role that the investor as well as the entrepreneur should be intimately involved with.
So I work with a lot of early founding teams. It's always messy. And they're often amazing, amazing groups of people. But I'll tell you, I have this little chart that I draw, which is, how do you know when a team's going to break up? This is really, really easy. This is ability to haul water and your growth, personal growth curve. Okay? So somebody performing incredibly well is going like that. If you have 2 members of your team going like that, that is a killer founding team. And if they have different skill sets, even better. But I always know, I just asked the CEO, could you just graph everyone on your team on this little chart? And they almost always do this. It's like 2 like that. Then you got this guy blips down, he's out. You got somebody who like starts, they're like, oh my God, amazing, crash, gone. And so you just chart it and you know, it's just like a really easy check-in I do with all the founders. Like, where are you guys? Who's hauling water and who's growing really fast? Because if you're on any founding team, that's just, you won't survive any other way. So the other thing is there are 2 books and exercises I take every founding team through. One is Crucial Conversations. If you have not read it and implemented it in every relationship you have, you're insane. And then you should read Founder Dilemmas if you haven't, which is all about how do you split equity, because that'll just blow up your team in about 10 seconds. So, there's the equal teams, and there are the teams that lock in and never change. Like, there are a lot of ways you could destroy your company by getting really rigid or not rigid enough. So I would just check out both of those books. Chapter 6, I think it is, for Founder Dilemmas, about how to split equity. And Crucial Conversations. Honestly, if you can really talk through hard stuff, you are very likely to succeed and haul a little water and just keep growing. So,
Stan, you or your partners end up being board members. Yeah. And as the investments grow, the role of the board in deciding the leadership of the company is important. Sometimes you have to fire founders. That's a tension. Lots of people have mentioned.
We love that.
yeah,
I'm sure. But that's the worst case in some way, or it's one of the negative outcomes.
No, but,
but talk about the role of the team and what role do you play as investors?
Yeah, it's a very good point. And the biggest single piece of advice that's related to that is pick your board well. Because in the end, the odds of your initial founding team being the same team by the time your company goes public is somewhere less than 0, right? And odds are large percentage of them won't scale. Some of them underperform. Some of them will quit because they're going to be have an affair with some hotel operator, and then you go somewhere else. And all this stuff is going to happen, and somebody's going to help you build and replace and grow in this team. And importantly, somebody's going to has to objectively look at what's going on and have the right judgment to tell you the VP of sales is not scaling. Because you're never going to know. You are going to be down in the trenches with these people. You're going to be fighting the good fight, and every one of you is going to be working as hard as you can. And unless it's obvious because they're doing something incredibly stupid, you're just not going to know. And a good board member will be on a few other boards. They'll have lots of experience, and they'll be able to see. Listen, this VP of sales is weaker than the other 3 that I just saw at board meetings over the last month, and we can keep him or her, or we can upgrade. And at some point you can make a tough decision. A good board member is going to know whether when someone is not scaling, whether it's something that's coachable or something that's not coachable, right? Maybe they'll be able to pull someone aside and say, you need to do this better, and then maybe pull them aside and say, you got to find a different role, Bobby, right? It's something else. And importantly, you need to find someone that you trust to fire you, right? Because you may not make it, and and firing you can mean a couple of things, right? The lightweight, and this, by the way, is not something we like to do, but the lightweight version is you're just not making it as a CEO, and somebody needs to be brought in on top, and somebody needs to tell you that. And, you know, board members and venture capitalists come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, and the worst case scenario for you is somewhat of a formula. And right now, you know, there's two formulas out there. One is that's being preached more and more, which is founders are always good CEOs. We're going to always back the founders to be CEOs, and that's great. It's going to make you feel terrific. And you know, so if you look at a history, the odds are bad, right? It doesn't mean that they're zero, but they're bad. And then there's venture capitalists that are out there. Basically, their formula is we always change the CEO, right? And that's, you know, works in many percentage-wise. That's a better bet, but you know, you miss Dell, you miss Microsoft, you miss Facebook, you miss this Broadcom, you know, the companies that matter. So you need someone who's going to be able, whose judgment you trust to tell you if it's time to step aside. And they have to be right, because once you take an investment from them and you get a board of people, you know, that decision may not be in your hands. And sometimes, you know, maybe you're just not made for this job. People start companies and end up being crappy operators, and the best thing for the company is to move them out. No, venture people hate doing that. It's terrible for our reputation to fire founders, right? It's bad enough for us to move them aside and bring in a CEO if they're resistant. It's terrible for us to fire them. But sometimes it's the right thing to do. And sometimes, you know, you should be doing something else, and you need someone to tell you to do that. So it's an incredibly important decision to make. I think, you know, all three of them talked about the team you started with. Think about how your team is going to evolve. Think about the advisors that are going to help you decide how the team evolves.
Great. All right. Now I'd like to open it up for questions more broadly, unless you all have comments or questions for each other.
That one works.
Doesn't work?
Oh, no.
Works fine. Speak loudly. Who has a question for this group of venture investors? Arthur.
Thank you very much. That was a great talk tonight. My question is one focused on sort of the operations side of the money, and that is, could you talk a little bit about what, if any, restrictions you all place on spending of the funds, whether that's you as investors or the board of directors?
We expect that you spend the funds on growing a business, so. But I mean, we expect you're a responsible adult and that you're using the money to fund the business. I mean, other than that, it's small money for us, so it's hard to put lots of controls in there.
But we also would expect that in terms of access to the bank and cutting checks, we usually require 2 signatures if it's over a certain amount. That's usually at the early stage where there's more than 2 co-founders when the team's getting larger. So that's a common mechanism, and that's actually good common practice. Almost expected, but that would be one thing that we would require. And then, of course, the role of the board and oversight on a monthly basis as well.
All right, one other question from up here. Yes, Miss.
Hi.
Speak
This
up.
is for all of you. Do you think that people who are risk averse or people who aren't able to take on a lot of risk, or to be more plain, people who cannot accept failures or take on failure as well, they cannot be good entrepreneurs? What do you think about that?
Yes, don't be an entrepreneur. If you cannot fail, don't be. What would that mean, though? I've never met anyone who fits that criteria. Do you mean you don't have your own capital? Or you mean emotionally you couldn't handle failure?
No, not capital, just like the fact that there's a good risk you're going to fail.
I think the important part is, I mean, you can't not accept failure. Everybody's failed, and you do something when it happens. It's what you do when it happens. And the important thing is being objective and looking at what happened and what you can do differently. And this is something that everybody will repeat and very few people will actually do. Sit down, and even on the most minor things that went wrong, oh, we failed to hire this guy, some other company hired them, or whatever, you need to sit down and think about what happened, how could we have done it differently, maybe we couldn't, or what or why. And that's a critical thing for an entrepreneur, I would say.
Pile on to, you know, so one thought to kind of to to give you is entrepreneurship is actually a pretty rational career choice for a lot of people. It's not a, you know, for the skydiving set and because you're probably going to fail and it's not going to work. You know, I hire a lot of folks into a lot of positions. I've tracked a lot of people's careers over a long period of time. And the reality is that folks in entrepreneurial careers tend to, on average, over a period of time, do better than folks in bigger companies. And even if they fail, they tend to get better jobs than somebody that's been in a bigger company sitting behind a desk pushing paper. So of course the people that succeed do better than the people who fail, but it's a rational choice. You just have to, you may have to give it some time, and you may have to take, you know, to use an American analogy, take a few swings at the bat before things really break your way. But it's not crazy.
But it's also easy to learn the skill of accepting failure. It's literally a skill that you can learn and you can get better at it. I mean, the older I get, the better I get at, like, I really screwed that up. Okay, that does not mean I'm a horrible person. That does not mean I'm a failure forever.
It may.
It may. You just gain this, like, thick skin, and it's good. So you'll just get there.
All right, next question. Yes.
On management changes, how often is it that the entrepreneurs eventually agree with venture capitalists? If you do have to swap out the team, obviously no one likes to say, look, I'm not doing a good job on this. But you know, a year down the road, 6 months down the road, how often is that still a continued point of disagreement in your experience?
It's rare. You know, in the end, it's our job, if we think something about someone's capabilities, to convince them of that. And if we can't convince them that maybe we're not doing our job or maybe we're wrong. I've only once moved aside a CEO who didn't want to be moved aside, and I ended up having to fire him from the company. Right? It was for, you know, I wasn't the one who was leading the charge. Everybody agreed on that at that point, and I was a difficult person. It happens rarely. It happens rarely.
Others just.
I would agree. I think, especially at the early stage, I do a lot of, like, what I consider CEO training, trying to help people understand, like, what does this role of CEO mean? So it's more that opposite side of helping people understand, what does it truly mean to lead an organization, to make those daily decisions? What does that feel like? And I think it takes a lot of practice to get good at it. So I actually think a lot of early stage CEOs, even with a ton of ego, think, I don't know what I'm doing here. So I think the skill really is building up that other side. I think mostly people really know when their time is up, when they are swimming in deep waters with no paddle, no boat, no nothing, and they are relieved. It's the unusual person who doesn't have the emotional intelligence usually to know that they're way out of their depth. So that's my experience.
Although on that front, we'll hear a full spectrum case example on Thursday where, yes. Next question.
My question is, how do you succeed when you are a contrarian and your idea is not really the so-called hot thing?
You all hear that?
Touched upon that.
Yeah, do you want to do that?
Yeah.
How do you succeed if you're a contrarian in your market selection?
Yeah, you're doing something that's not hot. Fundraising becomes very complicated. And I'm someone, so my background is technology. I invest in a lot of very techy companies. I sit on a board of a semiconductor company. I sit on a board of an optical communications company. You know, some sectors that are about as unhot as you can imagine. And what ends up happening is fundraising becomes difficult. The rounds, you know, one of my companies has done, so I'll give you an example. I have a company that my portfolio did $40 million last year in revenue. We have another company, and they raised a round earlier in the year at I don't know, 80 or 90 pre-valuation. We have another company in our portfolio that did the same revenue. They raised money at 650 pre-valuation. And the only difference between them is one's in a hot sector and one's not. It can make a dramatic difference to your ability to fundraise. In the long run, an argument can be made that the only way to make really big money is to be in a contrarian sector, right? Is to be first to a new sector. The trick is, how do you manage your capital needs so that you still own a lot of the company at the end? And it's a difficult thing to do. I think you can't be, like, if you can't do a biofuels company right now, right, where you're going to need $400 million, nobody's going to give it to you, even if you somehow got it, you own 0.01% of the company. That would be an insane thing to do. But there are other sectors that are not as capital intensive where you can be contrarian and succeed. You just have to be very clever about it.
Karl, any comment on that? You've been picked things well before they were
I've
obvious.
been a contrarian almost every time, but I think at the early stage, contrarian is probably good, as long as you can grow into a stage that becomes contrary, possibly. But
Do you mean as an investor or an entrepreneur?
early stage investor as well as an entrepreneur. But I think you still have to gauge your financial needs appropriately and raise money in the right manner, and to find it from the right sources at a time that you are contrarian. And so that just adds a greater challenge to the early stage. But if you truly believe in what you have, and if you think you have the right team, I think even in a contrarian environment, you probably will be able to find the right type of investor.
So I think entrepreneurs are incredibly scrappy, and you don't want to go to the insane level. But for instance, gaming companies right now are having an incredibly hard time raising money. As soon as Zynga's stock went down, like, all gaming companies were cut by 80% in their value, and all investors fled the space. And what I'm watching those kind of entrepreneurs do is customer fund. So they go and cut a biz dev deal, actually not dilutive almost at all. And it's turned out to be a fairly good way to fund their bets. So, I don't know what sector you're talking about, but I think you can customer fund. I think you can get grants. You can figure out a rich uncle. I mean, there's always a way if your idea is good enough, even in a contrarian space. So just careful on giving up too much of your company, and just pound the pavements.
All right, next question.
Hi, I want to ask if there's a few people in the company and you meet someone for lunch or something like that, will you meet all of them or just the CEO?
Oh, this would be the first time you're meeting a potential investment candidate? I would want to meet everybody. Of course, I'm at the earliest stage. I'm assuming your team is small, but that would be my preference. And that would not include members that maybe are difficult to access if you have a team across country, but I would expect to meet everyone at some point.
Just say founders. I usually meet the founding team.
Yeah, same thing.
Same thing. Okay.
All right, last question.
Okay, so I have a question about difference between angels and incubators, because as far as I know, some incubators help entrepreneurs a lot more than angels, I guess. I don't know, is this right? So I'm wondering if incubators can get more return back. I mean, it's easier to get success for the entrepreneurs if I get into the incubators.
I mean, yes. I mean, the reason we can help you more is that we have lots and lots of angels that help. So we just have an enormous number of mentors that help all of our companies. But I think it's so dependent on what, quote unquote, incubator, what angel, what you're doing. I think it's more nuanced than that, right? Like, these guys might be far better than any accelerator program in a certain sector of expertise, where a company is deeply scientific. They need their exact expertise. They need somebody to help write SBIR grants. They could actually be a much better choice for you. And I might be a much better choice in a different kind of a company. So I think you have to really understand who those people are and what your company needs. I don't think there's any mass generalization that I'm going to put out there.
Well, we've run out of time here in this session of Nuts and Bolts of New Ventures, but I really want to thank our panelists, Stan Reiss, Katie Rae, Karl Ruping, Max Lobovsky.
not to abuse my position here, but if you do anything very well and you're interested in building awesome 3D printers, come talk to me after. Thanks.
I love it. Always selling, always recruiting.